we are so used to prioritizing work over everything else that sometimes it's harder to deprioritize work than it is to put other things as a little bit of a higher priority.
Hey, how you doing? Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Branstetter, founder and podcast producer at MaxPodcasting, and you can email me at max@maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. This is episode 100 million, if you ignore the million, 156, and today's guest is Brittany Berger. Brittany is the founder of Work Brighter, a super cool digital marketing company that focuses on going beyond working smarter to working brighter. What does that mean? It means remixing content, focusing on minimalist content, and allowing time for rest, self-care, and fun. Three things that are pretty important. We talked all those things, how she got into that world in the first place, and everything from Broadway shows to a very, very nostalgic computer game. It is Brittany B. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with that B. Berg, Brittany Berger, who already has me doing jumping jacks and all sorts of things due to the alliteration in her name. But Brittany, how you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm Max Branstetter today. All right, we can stop. This is really cool. I think you've carved a really, really cool niche, just to use the word niche right away. We're going to get into some minimalist content marketing, some remixing content. But before that, I want to start off with your absolute favorite word in the world, which is hustle. What does the word hustle mean to you?
Exhaustion. Yeah, that's in a word, exhaustion.
And the word exhaustion is pretty exhausting too. But yeah, so a little bait and switch there. Obviously, hustle is not one of your favorite words in the world. Can you shed a little light on why, you hear so much about hustle culture these days, but you're not really kind of all for it, to put it lightly. How would you describe kind of your relationship with the word and culture around hustle?
I would definitely call myself a recovering workaholic, recovering hustler. Sometimes I do fall into that mindset again, but I really try not to because I've seen that it's really, really damaging. I kind of grew up in that 90s suburban mindset of, achievements are everything, kind of adults saying you can do anything. And so therefore we expect you to, fearing wasted potential and all that. And turned me into a big old workaholic and just tied most of my sense of self to work, whether that was like a job or schoolwork when I was younger, or hobbies, but just achievements and accomplishments and kind of the pursuit of excellence and fulfilling my quote unquote potential. But I am also disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent. And so I could never really actually hustle for that long before getting sick or burning out or just getting injured, and things like that. I just spent most of my life up until kind of my mid-20s in this kind of pursuit where I was just constantly self-sabotaging myself, though, because it was a game that was rigged against me. And around the same time that I was kind of coming to realize that for someone with my kind of health identity, that hustle culture wasn't just like counterproductive, but it was dangerous and it was harmful. Around that same time, I also discovered writing by a lot of like Black feminist scholars, like Trisha at the Nat Ministry, who were talking about this hustle culture, grind culture. And that kind of got me thinking that was like, wait, if hustle culture is bad for disabled people and chronically ill people, if it is bad for Black people and other people of color, if it was bad for women, could it be that it's just bad for everyone except like a select few? And that's kind of where I landed. But that was, a big thing to come to terms with, because I was someone who had put, like I said, my whole identity into my ability or perceived ability or desire to hustle. I actually had a newsletter at the time called Work Smarter and a blog about productivity and how to hustle. Over kind of the course of maybe like a year, it shifted to Work Brighter and going from just straight up productivity tips to more like questioning productivity culture in the first place.
I think that's a outstanding pivot from Work Smarter to Work Brighter. First of all, just the what do they say? Connotative definition of brighter. It's just so positive.
Yeah, it feels very on brand for the kind of brands I like too. It started as a personal mantra for myself.
Exactly. And it's very different than when you think about kind of like hustling and never sleeping or never taking breaks and just kind of the whole everything that comes with that. It is, back to your original word, it is extremely exhausting. What did the early days of Work Brighter look like?
So in the early days, I was still at my job as a content marketer and head of content for a SaaS company. I was, like I said, a very big workaholic. And so I had multiple side hustles. I was kind of getting into freelancing. I had a book blog about romance books, and I was super interested in productivity. So I was writing about productivity too. And that was kind of the onset of it. And the reason I wanted to start a productivity blog also was because, given that my day job was about marketing, didn't really feel necessary to write about like writing and marketing for my freelance business, but I did want to have content on that freelancing website for people to see that came there. So it was just kind of like looking for something else to write about, because at the time, I thought every minute of my life had to be working, and it was like, all right, I've still got a few hours a week for one more blog. And so that's kind of how it started. But then when I kind of got more intentional with it and more work brighter with it, it sort of became more focused on me experimenting with quote unquote best practices of productivity and questioning which ones were best and for whom, and more experiential. And now I feel like we're going through another evolution again, as I've done that with so many things, and I'm now kind of trying to step into a place of more expertise around it.
It's really cool to see when someone has a really kind of organic progression like that of discovering like new things to focus on or what's most meaningful and what resonates with your audience. What has been helpful for you as far as zeroing in on what's the most helpful tips for your target audience?
I think that I mostly tend to look at what people are talking about and struggling with. I spend a lot of time as a consumer on social media. I really spend more time on social as a consumer than as a kind of creator or marketer. So kind of just always very tapped into culture. We'll probably end up talking more about pop culture at some point later on, because that happens with conversations with me. Very tuned into the culture. So I kind of look at what topics are coming up over and over again. For example, right now, a hot topic that I have been talking about for, a while now, and it's finally getting into like Vox.com and the New York Times, is content creator burnout. Just by being around creators and being a creator myself, that's something that I've known is a thing for ages. But it's kind of just now at the point where people who aren't creators themselves are learning about it, where kind of more mainstream's talking about it. And so I feel like that's helpful. I also put things through a filter of what do I have a strong opinion about? There are a lot of things that I could write about that I just don't feel like, because I don't think that I have enough passionate about the topic, at least right now, to make it a really engaging and fun piece of content. So for example, one question that I do get a lot is how I organize my files on my computer. And I've talked about it in other blog posts where I talk about things that I do get a little bit more nerdy about, like digital decluttering. But I would rather I have another person's blog post about it that I like. And when people ask me, I send them that post instead of just writing one that I'm not going to be excited to write.
Wait, you don't like writing about stuff that's really boring to you? Are you kidding me? Sometimes the guest has like the segues of segues. So I have to thank you. Your check is in the mail. Let's get to minimalist content marketing, some content remixing, which kind of all ties back to content creation burnout, or the flip side, not getting burned out by content creation. You kind of made a name for yourself with minimalist content marketing. For those who aren't familiar, what's your definition of that?
So it is content marketing that focuses on using content and getting results over creating content. Because obviously creating content is important, but we have just over focused on it so much as an industry that we now think that just creating content over and over and over again and not doing anything really strategic with it is the job. And it's not the job.
I feel like just you saying that is like, has taken such a weight off me. Like when you first start getting into the marketing world, or you're focused on marketing a brand, there is that kind of pressure there of like, oh my God, do I need to post to Instagram 4 times a day? Do I need to switch from like a weekly podcast to a daily podcast? Do I need to tweet nonstop? Catch me on TikTok all the time doing dances left and right. There is such like almost like a race in the content creation world. I think you have a fantastic point. It doesn't need to be that way. There's ways to be better for you as a person, and maybe even your audience will enjoy better if you don't kind of go all in on that crazy content focus.
Yeah, when I got started in content marketing in 2010 and 2011, I mean, like a lot of the social networks and platforms that you mentioned weren't as popular or even around then, but like blogging was the thing. And like the goal for every brand at the time seemed daily blog posts. That's not a goal. It's not a real goal. Like at the time, I think that it had to do a lot with just how new a lot of the content marketing programs were, like, like eventually I figured it out, but I started noticing that a lot of people didn't and were still kind of confusing creating content with succeeding at content marketing. At the end of the day, they couldn't actually tell you how the content impacted their business because it probably didn't.
Which in hindsight is like the biggest dagger ever, because it's like, wow, how much time do we spend on this? We could have been doing other things.
And I've been there. The first company I worked at full time, like it took so much fighting just to get them to kind of give me the resources to do that as the content head. But like there was a point where like the sales team thought the blog idea was so silly that they like wouldn't talk to me about who our ideal customer was and what they needed to know. And so I really had no way of creating a strategic content plan. I was just doing the best that I can, as I think a lot of us are at any given time. But it's also time to do better because that approach is not efficient. And I think that just running what I like to call the more content treadmill, it's exhausting for you. It's going to burn you out. And it's just also not as helpful to your audience. I feel like the beginning of my whole direction of my career, this whole direction, like it was started the day that Mark Schaefer wrote his blog post about content shock. Like that's what happens on.
I'm still shocked from that, by the way.
Yeah, it was just such a great post. And I still have such a vivid memory of reading it for the first time. And that was when I first kind of shifted my mindset a little bit around like only publishing really strategic content and making sure not to just contribute to the noise. But I was still a workaholic at that time. And so I was still creating as much as I could and as much as I had ideas for and stuff like that. But eventually it just got to the point in my career where I was so burnt out that sometimes I couldn't create content, but I still had to deliver results. I had a whole chain of managers and supervisors above me that I had to report to, and I had to show them numbers. And so I had to get really creative with figuring out ways to get results from content without doing the deep work of writing something new from scratch.
So what are some of those ways? What are your favorite alternatives to the more content treadmill, as I just made up? No, just kidding. It's definitely yours.
Yeah. So I like to say that SNL style content is the constant content treadmill, the kind of more cowbell sketch.
Wait, there we go. Pop culture.
Exactly. I can't not talk about it. Go from that and kind of think about the SNL kind of structure. It is week after week for like 40 years now. So many weeks a year. They don't really do reruns. They don't do much syndication on other channels, at least. Now they do at least do YouTube and stuff like that. So they're very much constantly pushing out more content. And a lot of it you never see or think about again. Think about how many sketches you can think about and remember from the show off the top of your head compared to, or that are still kind of relevant in pop culture compared to how many sketches have been produced. So think about that. And that's like more content, like the more cowbell sketch. Think about that compared to people like Cher and Beyonce, who really are focused on creating less. And when they create something, they really milk it for all that it's worth. Cher went on half a dozen different farewell tours. She has like, I think 3 different greatest hits albums, all songs that she's recorded on other albums before. She has remastered versions of those albums. Oh, I love this chain of Mamma Mia was a Broadway musical that remixed ABBA music. And then that musical was remixed into a movie. And then that movie was remixed into a sequel that Cher starred in. She remixed that into an ABBA cover album, and then that was remixed into a whole live tour.
So I think that chain right there just like solved the world's problems. That's incredible.
And Beyonce did the same thing with Coachella. Like a lot of time at the time, a lot of people were shocked at how little money, if any, she accepted to perform at Coachella. And then a few months later, we found out that she sold the rights for a documentary of it to Netflix for like multiple millions. And she also re-released the Beyonce album, a remastered version, only like 2 years after. She does the visual albums. She is just amazing at it too. Billy Joel is another one that's really good.
Okay, you have to give the Billy Joel example now.
It's similar to Cher in structure, that he pushed out so much content that, once he got to the age where he could retire, instead of just like fully going away, he just kind of scaled down to like a lower energy version, like he remasters the songs he's already written. He doesn't write a ton of new songs anymore though. He does the remastered versions, the greatest hits albums. He does the live tours, which are then remixed into live versions. But when he didn't feel like traveling for concerts anymore, he created a residency in New York City. So he was just doing the same show once a month in the same place.
I was going to say, and that is why his jersey's retired in Madison Square Garden, and he's there every single night and probably every lunch and dinner and breakfast and everything in between as well. But I love those examples. It's always cool when there's music crossovers as well. Music tie-ins as well. Ties-ins? I just invented that. I would love to reframe it as a small business owner. Like if you're listening to this and you're a small business owner, what are some awesome ways that you can remix your content?
Let's take this interview, for example, what I could personally do with this interview, just since I know my own business goals and content strategies better than your businesses. So once this comes out, first of all, I can write a blog post linking to it, or even embed the podcast episode in my blog. I can then promote that through my email list and social media using clips and quotes as I do so I don't have to write stuff from scratch. I can then pull out any main talking points that we have into separate, shorter blog posts. So for example, the more content analogy could be its own blog post, which then also the cycle continues where it's the blog post and then that's the email and the social posts as well.
This episode is going to end up being a version of Mamma Mia and a Cher album, isn't it?
Exactly. Every piece of content you want to treat like Cher treats Mamma Mia. But like, yeah, in practicality, take, what's a free piece of content we spend a lot of time on? Let's say you're hosting a webinar. That is probably one of the harder pieces of free or long form content to produce. It's a lot of work. And then most people usually just host it once and they're done, or they put it on Evergreen, but they don't really promote the landing page for it that much. But what if you also took out each of the main kind of sections and wrote a blog post about that, using some of the graphics and copy from your slides and turning them into blog post format? What if you also, and then in that you linked to the landing page to promote it? What if you also took kind of 1-minute video clips for YouTube and social media, pulling out really quotable moments and doing it that way? And what I love about this approach, and this is why I call it remixing instead of repurposing, is that you are reimagining it and you are repurposing it, but you are also changing the context and editing it enough that it doesn't just take the content from one platform to another. It also makes people aware of like the podcast episode or the webinar or something like that. So it serves as repurposing and promotion at the same time.
It blows my mind when, like, you just take an example of an episode like this and you just rattled off so many different examples of how you can remix it. Like, there's so much you can pull from, as previous guest Ailey Judge calls it, big content. I'm talking about like podcasts and videos. How often do you recommend being involved or recording that big content, whether it be podcasts or videos, something else long form? How often do you recommend doing that while you're kind of doing all the remixing in between?
It just depends on your resources and how much you can handle. So for example, I am a one-person show here. And I'm also running 2 businesses. So each of them, I publish weekly email content, but those are usually pretty casual and short form. And then in terms of kind of big content, I publish maybe 1 piece a month. But because of how much I am remixing that and promoting that, it usually lasts like all month. Like I'll reference it in multiple different emails to my list so that, I still have something to email them about every week. I'm still sharing things on social media and things like that. And so because I'm remixing so much and so consistently, you don't need to create as much. And so it's definitely a delicate balance that depends on everyone else, depends on things like what resources you have, along with what stage of business you're at. Because I have a lot of content that I'm sitting on. And so in addition to publishing new content, I'm also continuing to remix very old content. One thing that I think a lot of people mess up when it comes to remixing and content promotion is that they only promote something when it's new. But then once they have a new piece of content out, like the next week, they kind of very rarely ever mention the previous pieces of content again. But like my emails every single week will contain a blog post that's like a year old. And so despite not constantly creating new stuff, I still always have stuff to be putting out and talking about.
Hey, it's Max Branstetter. What if you could create some pillar content like a podcast for your business or your personal brand, and then remix that just like Brittany's talking about for weeks and years and decades, on and on and on? There's so much you can do from a podcast, especially if it's a long-form interview or there's some cool different segments that dive deep into strategies and tips that are very helpful for the listeners. You can chop that up. You can turn it into so many different other bits of content. If that is something you're interested in, and if you want help getting the ball rolling on the podcast thing, the biggest form of content itself, email me at max@maxpodcasting.com. Let's make it happen so you can start remixing it like Brittany is talking about. Now, to remix the conversation a little bit with a little bit more remixing on remixing. I'd love to switch gears a little bit. We'll remix this a little bit. See what I did there? Get to inspiration and creativity. And typically dive into kind of people who inspire you, hobbies, resources, things that help you stay creative. But on your site, there's a few words that would love to dive into how you create kind of boundaries to allow yourself for these things. So the 3 words, I guess it's 3 in a hyphen, so whatever the official terminology is: rest, self-care, and fun. I think those are things that anybody would be excited to have more of, all those things. How do you ensure, while you're spending so much time kind of creating content and remixing content, you still have time to rest, you still have time to kind of recharge, take care of yourself, as well as you're still having fun throughout everything?
This is where mindset and boundaries and kind of the work brighter stuff kind of come in. Because remixing and repurposing on its own doesn't guarantee that you're going to work less. I kind of feel like Gary Vee and I have very, very, very opposing viewpoints, but tactically, we're talking about very similar content strategies. We're both talking about heavy repurposing, but we're just approaching it from such different mindsets that's really the difference. So if you're a workaholic, and if you're obsessed with your work and you learn how to remix and you prioritize remixing, you definitely might not be able to find much time for rest and self-care. So it's definitely the mindset part of things. And it's kind of just refusing the hustle. So for example, I could tell myself that even though I am emailing my list every week, that's not good enough, and that I also need to repurpose that email into a blog post and 10 social media posts every week. But I just had to be comfortable saying no to those things.
Yeah, I just got tired when you were explaining that. Yeah, it's really fascinating. And I love your stuff. I love Gary Vee's stuff. Like, I think there's room for so many different mindsets and approaches to it, obviously.
It's also a knowing your goals thing. Because another thing about Gary Vee, and I swear I'm not hating on Gary Vee, but what I feel like isn't contextualized enough is what his business model is. He is a public speaker and book author. He's not driving service leads for his business through his content. Like, yes, VaynerMedia does that, but that's a different marketing strategy that we don't see, his clients see. So I feel like a lot of people look at his content strategy, they like it, they see that, he has a lot of followers, and so they assume that it will also work for their freelancing business or their e-commerce business. And it's just context, completely different contexts.
Yeah, it's completely different. In terms of rest for you, I mean, that's a key word. That's a keyword. How do you ensure that you are having time to kind of rest and recharge?
I'm a really big fan of essentialism, the mindset kind of talked about and written about in the book by Greg McKeown. And that's just like knowing the right things to do. There's so much in my business that I could do that I don't, that I probably should do, but I don't. They would be great ideas. They'd probably be very successful, but I just don't. And so I've just had to become comfortable saying no to things and really prioritizing my health. And what I really find easy about that is focusing on the long-term big picture. I have learned the hard way that if I ignore my exhaustion and my tiredness and my burnout long enough, that then I can't work. And so while I am trying to become less of a workaholic, kind of a more workaholic way to look at rest is that you need rest to work well. And that if I really telling myself, if I love my work, the best thing I can do is cap it at 45 hours a week, because that is studied and found over and over again to be the point of diminishing returns. So that even if I'm like having fun, it is becoming less effective. And if I care about my business, then I'm not going to do that.
And from care to self-care, how do you do this? Segue what? No, I'm just kidding. Self-care. And it goes hand in hand with rest, but overall, I mean, there's more dimensions to it as well. How do you ensure that kind of you're maintaining that focus on self?
I create systems for it. I know that this might not work for everyone. Like if you're not a to-do list person, then adding self-care stuff to your to-do list won't work. But for me, I am very much a systems person. I love, planners and journals and to-do lists. And what I realized at one point is that all of those things were only focused on work. They weren't putting there wasn't anything on those lists that was helping me do my work better. And so by putting eat breakfast in the morning section of my to-do list and ensuring that I don't try to write on an empty stomach, things like that, that is self-care. Because there's still just, no matter how much I work on my workaholism, there is that part of my brain that wants everything on the to-do list to be crossed off. And that means, I'm gonna eat all 3 meals instead of just, snacking in between writing sprints.
Yeah, I'm all for anything with food. But adding that, over the years, I've added more stuff like that to my calendar. Like I have nap on my calendar or walk or gym, shower. Okay, probably too much information.
No, but that's exactly. I have that stuff. I have take my meds. I have everything because we are so used to prioritizing work over everything else that sometimes it's harder to deprioritize work than it is to put other things as a little bit of a higher priority and equal things out that way.
That's spot on. And last thing, maybe the most important or what people get most excited about, it's definitely SpongeBob's favorite word, fun. How do you ensure you're having fun through all this?
I schedule that too, in terms of like fun breaks, So Brooklyn Nine-Nine is coming back this week. That is on my calendar. The whole season is blocked off on my calendar so that I know when I'm doing my weekly planning and stuff like that. Sometimes I write at night, but like Thursdays for the next few weeks, I'm gonna make that time. I have the same thing with Saturday movie nights. I do the same with like video games a lot. So like I used to notice that a lot of times I used to get pulled into like a big important work task, but I only had like half an hour before a meeting or something like that. And then I would get like frustrated that I wouldn't really have time to get into the zone on it and stuff like that. But I didn't necessarily want to waste my energy on less important work either. So now what I do, and I have found to be like a perfect wind up for meetings and stuff like that, is playing The Sims. I can't get sucked into it for like 8 hours like I did when I was a kid because I have the meeting. Another thing that I do is I'll play The Sims on my laptop and I'll take it somewhere in a separate room as the charger so I can only play it for as long as the battery lasts. I do put like systems in place to make sure that I don't get sucked in for too long, but that I do get the rest and rejuvenation that I need. Like I have the Netflix "Are You Still Watching" thing turned on. I haven't turned that off no matter how much Netflix I watch, because when it pops up, that's usually a good like check in with myself, be like, all right, I've watched 3 episodes. It's time to go back to doing something else.
Yeah, they should put that in italics. Like, are you still watching?
I wish we had more control over it. That's what I wish, because like I would turn it off on weekends, but then I would turn it on like in the afternoons when I was taking a break from work, or like at night when I'm falling asleep to Netflix. I wish that they would just put me in control and just trust me, Netflix.
Trust me, Netflix.
Trust me with your whole empire.
You got to remix that into all sorts of things. Speaking of Netflix, let's get to a fan favorite segment called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
Thank you. Round of applause. Wild Business Shout Out of the Week. This is where we talk about a marketing campaign or some form of content out there that's really cool. It broke through the clutter. Netflix has a pretty cool series that's a bit different than what you think of when you think of a Netflix series. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So this is actually on their YouTube channel, and it's called I Like to Watch, or I Love to Watch. I forget which one, but it is hosted by the drag queen Drag Race All-Stars, Trixie and Katya. And it is where the two of them, who just have this fantastic relationship and banter that is hilarious to watch. They also have a podcast and other YouTube shows together. But Netflix has actually brought them in to do this YouTube show where they watch Netflix movies and TV shows and react. And it is just hilarious. You'll watch them watch a horror movie or a super cheesy Christmas movie or something like that. And they are just making jokes and snarking with each other the whole time. And it is hilarious, but it's also a really effective way to promote Netflix stuff. They're doing a mix of new content promotion. So like when a new season of a Netflix show comes out or when there's a new movie that they're marketing a lot, Trixie and Katya will react to that. So when the movie My Best Friend's Wedding came to Netflix, found out about that through Trixie and Katya's episode about it. And this has become so popular that it has actually expanded to other countries where other all-stars from the other country versions of RuPaul's Drag Race do the same thing with the Netflix collections and libraries in those other countries.
That is magical. And that's like what you're all about, like the remixing content and creating something that's like on a totally different media, like YouTube versus Netflix. I mean, a lot of people probably consider them competitors. That's amazing that it's like picked up and gone all around the world like that. What is it about these like reaction type videos that you think has picked up so much in recent years?
I think first of all, the whole reaction thing is such a trend and staple of YouTube already. So I think it was really smart of Netflix to take something that was already happening on YouTube and even probably already happening to these very same shows, but kind of owning a piece of the conversation themselves as the owner of, the main piece of content. So I think that that's really effective. And then I think that there's also just the magic of collaborating with other popular brands, Drag Race, All Stars, and these individual drag queens, all of them. So it's kind of like a multi-way promotion because like Trixie and Katya each have their own fan bases. They also have their joint fan base. Then there's also the Drag Race fan base. And then there's the Netflix fan base, all combining together to kind of find this video in their recommended feed.
And then back to Mamma Mia and back to Cher.
Exactly.
And then Billy Joel remasters it as well. Let's wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Yep.
All right, let's get wild. List the top 100 pop culture. No, I'm just kidding. What is your favorite memory from playing The Sims?
It's not a specific memory to the game, but I remember when I first got into The Sims, it would be at my friend Kat's house. We would go over there after school because her bus stop was before mine. And so part of that was The Sims. And then we would go there after school. We would see what her older brother and sister were doing. So I would get kind of, my peek of what the cool older kids were doing. And then we'd go in the basement and play The Sims. And it was The Sims 1, or no, I think it was The Sims 2. It was the age of living large.
That's amazing. Yeah, I got some great memories of playing Sims with friends as well. It was a fun thing to play with friends. I don't know what it is about The Sims, but it was a good friends thing.
Exactly. Like for a one-person game, it's such a fun group activity. I used to do that in college too, actually. Summer and winter breaks. My friends and I, we would just like hang out in my apartment after work and we would watch TV. Actually, Mamma Mia, we would watch that movie constantly. It was the year I got that on DVD. And we would just play The Sims. Yeah, it's such a fun group thing.
Now, did you ever play Sim City or Sim? I'm just going to make one up. Sim Possible? No, there's other Sims.
I never got that into SimCity, but I have played it.
Speaking of big cities, I know you spent some time living in New York. What was your favorite part about living in the city?
Oh, it was being able to do the Broadway lottery tickets. Obviously, I'm a huge pop culture fan, but a big part of that is specifically musical theater. And I feel like part of the reason I wanted to move to New York in the first place. And I had always heard that when you lived in New York City, going to Broadway shows wasn't expensive anymore. And I never really understood the math behind that. But it's because of the lottery tickets. Where as long as you're like available and if once they call you, then tell you that you've won, you can be at the theater in like an hour. It costs like $5 or $10 to enter the lotteries. And I just used to do that all the time. I saw Hedwig and the Angry Inch, I think maybe 4 times, and it was on Broadway for less than a year.
You were at every show.
Yeah, because they kept changing casts. So I saw the Neil Patrick Harris version and the Darren Criss version, but the creator playing the lead role as well. So yeah, every time they got a new Hedwig, I would enter the lottery again, just keep entering until I won. So yeah, lots of cheap movie tickets, and I would just kind of go on my lunch break from the co-working space where I worked full time. On my lunch break, I would go enter the lottery, and then you enter enough and you win, unless it's the Hamilton one, which I never did. And so then, yeah, I would like find out mid-afternoon. I would kill time in the city in Midtown between after work and until the show. And it was just so much fun. It was honestly a really cheap way to have a night out in New York City.
What is your biggest pet peeve?
Probably hustle culture. We talked about that.
See,
already,
I need to change that question. It's just too easy. It just goes back to the start. And I'll give it to you, though. Other than Mamma Mia and Hedwig and everything that you mentioned before, what is your favorite Broadway show of all time?
Oh, this is such a hard question. Oh, it might be Hairspray. It's just so much fun. And it was one of the first ones that I saw, although I saw it off Broadway as a piece of musical theater, regardless of where you see it. It was just so much fun and so energetic. And it was one of the first I saw, so it had a big impact on me. Plus, I grew up in Baltimore and it took place in Baltimore. And I think that was probably the first musical that I'd ever heard of that mentioned it.
You are making my girlfriend Dana melt because she's a huge Broadway fan as well. And I recently asked her what her favorite was, off the record. She said Hairspray is probably her favorite of all time. Brittany, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you coming on, sharing your stories, your tips, your pop culture references. I need to sign off and go play The Sims now. But thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story. Where is the best place for people to connect with you and learn more about what you're doing?
Sure. So the websites for my businesses are brittanyberger.com and workbrighter.co. And I'm also super active on Twitter. I should find something better to do with my time, but my handle is @bberg.
Perfect. No, there's nothing better than just being on Twitter for hours and hours.
My mental health could use it.
And then last thing here, stage is yours. Final thoughts. Send us home here. It could be anything you want.
Just create less, remix more.
And there's always room for more cowbell. Brittany, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your amazing stories, advice, strategy, pop culture nostalgia, all the above. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite app and tell a friend about the podcast. You can also find us on Good Pods. Pretty cool place to be. And for any help with podcast production, you can learn more at MaxPodcasting.com. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!